Hi everyone, this is Dr. Nitin Chhoda and welcome to this video training on financial planning and money management tips, how to make debt work for you, how to actually make money work for you. Now, there are a lot of gurus out there, Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman. They have some great stuff, but they believe that debt is bad for you and you should be debt free. I'm here to tell you that that's not necessarily true. One of the reasons I and a lot of real estate investors have built successful real estate empires is because we have successfully and responsibly leveraged debt. Now, the key word here is responsible. Let me give you some examples so you understand how to use debt. Let's say you go out and buy a brand new car and you get a 0% loan for maybe the first couple of years, and after that you pay 1 or 2%. Ask yourself, is that an example of good debt or bad debt? It really depends. I mean, if that car is going to make a huge difference to your way of living and you're able to pay it off responsibly, then, if it makes you happy, because, there's a psychology to debt also, then, that's fine. But if you're the kind of person that likes to get a new car every 2 or 3 years, then that's an example of bad debt, because the moment you drive the car off the lot, it's lost value. Okay. Now, let me give you another example of bad debt. If you have high credit card balances and you're paying high interest on those credit card balances, that's bad debt, because now that interest is eating away at your ability to save money. Bad debt is debt that eats away at your finances, that puts you in a position where you have to keep paying off the money, where you're struggling to pay off a loan, where maybe you have to resort to, loans from paycheck companies, or you have to maybe borrow money in order to pay off that debt. Bad debt traps you in a vicious cycle where it gets worse and worse, where the debt accumulates and where the banks and where the borrowers end up making more and more interest from you every month. Please try to avoid those kinds of situations. What's an example of good debt? Good debt is when the money that you borrow actually makes you more money than what it costs to borrow. So again, good debt is when the money that you borrow makes you more money than what it costs to borrow. I'll give you an example of a scenario right now, the economic injury disaster loan, which is something that's being handed out by the Small Business Administration. You're actually borrowing money at 3.75% interest, but you're making more than 3.75% interest. Let's say you're a business owner and you use that money for inventory, for marketing. You're going to make more than 3.75%. In fact, I want you to really think about this. Inflation is normally 2 to 3% a year. So if you borrow money at 3 or 4%, think about it. By the first year, that money, because of inflation, has already lost 2.5% of its value. By the second year, the money's lost another 2.5%. But if you're borrowing the money today, and if you're able to make that money grow, by the end of the second year, you're actually getting paid to borrow that money. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. You're actually getting paid to borrow that money. Why? Because if your $100 is going to go down to $97.50 by the end of this year, and it's going to be worth $95 by the end of the second year, your fixed interest cost is only 3.75%, but the cumulative value of that $100, cumulatively keeps declining by 2.5% a year, but your cost is fixed at 3.75%. You're actually ahead of the curve. Now, if your interest rate was higher, 9%, 10%, 11%, the numbers wouldn't make sense. But if you're borrowing money at a low interest rate, but if you're using that money to make more money, you are ahead of the curve, because you're using what I call as a time value of money in your favor. The time value of money, it's basically a principle that implies that as time goes by, your money becomes worth less and less. So essentially, today's money is more valuable than tomorrow's money. Now, because today's money is more valuable than tomorrow's money, if you're borrowing money and getting it in your hands today at a low interest rate, but using it to make more money, you are ahead of the curve. But if you're borrowing money and paying interest and continuously paying interest, and that money is not making you money, that's when the debt that was supposed to be good becomes bad debt. For example, if you're running a business and you have credit card bills and you're not able to pay off the credit card bills and you're paying interest every month, that now becomes a case of bad debt. If you're a business owner and you swipe your credit card, but you're able to not only pay off that credit card because you get the money back from your clients or the people you sell your product to, but you pay off the credit card and then have some left over, you've actually used the bank's money and leveraged it for maybe however long it takes you until the payment due date comes. You've leveraged it to grow your business. In fact, back in the days when I had no money, I would get credit cards with 0% APR for 9 months or even a year, and then I would actually use the money to grow my business, and then I would make the minimum payment for 8 or 9 months, because then that way I wouldn't have any late fees or any finance charges, because it was an introductory offer. And then at the end of the 9th or 10th month, I'd have sort of, essentially floated that money at 0% for several months, and then I'd simply pay off that money at one shot at the end, because I was able to make the money back and then some. So if you're strategic about floating money, and again, this is not for everyone, it requires that you keep an eye on what your expenses are, keep an eye on what your income is, and you know your numbers precisely. But again, that's what it takes to grow businesses. Remember this: anything that gets measured can be grown. So if you measure your cost of borrowing money and then you measure how much you're getting back as a result of deploying that money, again, whether it's in your own business, if you're a sole proprietor doing whatever, or whether it's deploying that money into real estate or even index funds in the stock market, the question is, are you going to make more than what you're borrowing it for? If you're borrowing money at 8%, 10%, but if you're able to make 15, 20%, why? Because you put that money into your business, and then a year from now that business profit margin was 20%. Guess what? You borrowed money, and let's say you paid 10%, but you made 20%, which means your net gain was 10% by borrowing money. So debt, when used successfully, when used intelligently, when used strategically, can be very good, can contribute to your wealth, and in most cases it will. But debt, when used badly, can create problems, which is why a lot of gurus out there recommend that you be debt free. I personally am a big fan of debt, as long as it's low interest debt. As long as you can get debt at a low interest rate, 2, 3, 4%, which you can get if you get a federal loan for buying a property, or some of these economic injury disaster loans. I mean, I think that's extremely cheap money. And if you're able to use that money successfully, because remember, if you just leave that money lying in a bank account, it's losing value by 2.5% a year. Remember, money sitting in your bank is losing value at 2.5% a year. And if it just sits in your bank account, every 17 years, it loses half of its value. So you don't want your money to lose value. At the minimum, you want your money to keep pace with inflation, which is between 2 and 3%. But ideally, you want your money to make significantly more than your borrowing cost. Because again, if you borrow at 3 or 4%, you want to try and make 8 or 9 or 10%. And then that difference, that arbitrage, if you will, of 5 or 6% is where you can make money. And that is an example of good debt. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this helped. If you benefited from this video, please click like, please click subscribe. It'll really help the YouTube algorithm. I really appreciate you watching. I hope this was helpful. Please type your comments below, and I'm so excited to be able to interact with you through the comment section and answer any questions you have about the time value of money, about good debt versus bad debt. If you have specific questions about specific examples that you're going through, and if you wonder whether that's good debt or bad debt, I'm happy to chime in. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next training. Thanks.